we have the square root of a negative number, that's imaginary, because we can't find something that multiplies by itself to make a negative. That doesn't happen. Whenever you multiply something by itself, you have to get a positive. So there's no way it could be negative. So I'm going to write more than I need to here, but I want to show what I'm talking about. So I can split this one up into two pieces. I can say the square root of positive 3, because that's a real number, right? If it's the square root of positive. But then if I say times negative 1, that's the same thing. That's the same thing as the square root of negative 3, but I separated out the square root of negative 1. Okay? So I got my positive square root of 3. I just have to multiply it because that's the same thing now. So I'm writing it more complicated, but it's the same thing. Times the square root of 3 minus the square root of 2 times I minus, I'm going to do the same thing to these. Again, probably more writing than I need to do, but the square root of 3 times the square root of negative 1 gives me the same thing. And the square root of 2 times the square root of negative 1 gives me the same thing. So I just rewrote it, and every time I had a negative, I just took out the negative as a 1. I just factored it. Is that clear? Negative, the square root of 3 times the square root of negative 1 is the same thing. When I multiply them, I get back to that. So I just changed the way it looked. That's all I did. Because I have this notation, and the notation goes like this. I is equal to the square root of negative 1. So wherever I see the square root of negative 1, I can just put an I in there. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to say square root of 3 times I times the square root of 3 minus, I already have an I here, I don't need to do that, minus the square root of 3 times I instead of the minus 1, and the square root of 2 times I instead of the minus 1. Notice that the I doesn't go underneath the radical. It's off there by the side. Minus 2. So I replaced all my negative 1s with I. That's all I did. I want to write it as an I instead of a negative 1. Because, I mean, most of it is real, the square root of 3, but I have this part that's not real. It's imaginary. Okay. All right, so let's combine these now the best that we can. The square root of 3 times the square root of 3 is 3, right? So I just have 3 times I, and I have minus square root of 2 times I. Okay, this gets interesting. I have negative. I'm going to say square root of 3 times square root of 2. What's the square root of 3 times the square root of 2? I just multiply the numbers and put it under the radical. So I get 3 times 2 is 6. So I say square root of 6. And I have I times I. So now I have I squared, right? I times I. So I squared, and then minus 2. Okay, well, we know that I is equal to negative 1, square root of negative 1. So what's I squared equal to? When I get I times I get the square root of negative 1 times the square root of negative 1. If I square the square root, I should get what's underneath there, so I get negative 1, right? And now it's not imaginary anymore, right? Because negative 1, that's real. It's just the square root I don't like. So if I have 2 of them multiplied together, no more imaginary, right? Now it's real. If I multiply 1 of these times 2 of these, and I get I to the third, then I just have a negative version of that. And then if I do it to the fourth, then I say negative 1 times negative 1 is the same thing as, so it's positive. And if it's I to the fourth, it's like it was never there. It just goes away. Poof. Well, then you start back over again. Then it's negative 1, square root of negative 1. And I to the sixth would be negative. So once you get to 4, you start over. Because, 4 is nice and nothing. It's 1. So I really don't care. Thank you, Nate. As long as you make up this work. Okay, so let's just finish this off. Let's say I'm going to combine these two because they both have an I. And I'm going to say 3 minus the square root of 2. And I factored out an I, so there it is. Is that important? It's not the most important thing I did. Just kind of cleaning it up a little bit. But here's the interesting part again. The last thing is that if I have an I squared, that's the same thing as a negative 1. So that's just going to change the sign on that 6. So it's going to be plus the square root of 6. And it's gone now. It just became a negative 1. So it changed the sign, minus 2. And that's it. Is that clear?